to Nate to do that introduction.
Okay. Yeah, as you all know, Don Manekin is our speaker. Don learned real estate from his father, Harold Manekin, who is the co-founder of the Manekin Corporation, a premier Baltimore commercial real estate firm. And then for about 20 years, he was vice president and partner with the Manekin Corporation, operating a lot of the time in Columbia. Then from 2000 to 2002, he was the chief operating officer for Baltimore City Schools. Then he kind of retired, but then in 2006, his son came to him and said, why don't we form Seawall Development Corporation, which he's been working at since. He's been the regional president of the National Association of Industrial and Office Properties and on the National NAIOP board. He's taught graduate students at M.I.T, Hopkins, and Loyola. He is a board member or has been a board member of the United Way of Central Maryland, Columbia Foundation, and Teach for America. And of course, he's the author of the book, The Inside Out Company, Putting Purpose and People First. But before we have him speak, I would like Steve Gregg, who introduced himself, among other things, being the former international president of LAI, to talk about the what happened on the tour that Don gave of the Remington area at our Lou in Baltimore. Steve?
Okay, thank you. Yeah, happy to do that. As Tara was mentioning earlier, during the Baltimore Lou, we had the opportunity to tour that area with Donald, and it was just fascinating to see what they had done with that neighborhood. But what struck me most about that is as we were walking through the neighborhood, a big group of us, I noticed this gentleman coming down the street towards us. And he just kind of waded through the middle of all of these white collar professional looking people and walked up to Donald and thanked him for the work he had done in the neighborhood and how it had changed his life, and just gave him a big hug of thanks for everything that they had done there. And the thought that occurred to me that came to mind immediately is Donald and T-Bold embrace the saying, doing well and doing good is not mutually exclusive. And if you're a real estate developer and you have the neighborhood hugging you after you're through with your development, you obviously have done something right. So I was very inspired by that. I invited Donald to come see us in Phoenix, where I was living at the time. And he spoke to our young leaders in our LAI chapter there and toured the city with us and gave us some interesting insights. So very pleased to hear him speak today. And I've been reading his book as well and trading some emails with him on the inspirations that I get from the book. So thanks for having me.
Thanks, Steve. Well, rather than have Donald give a PowerPoint presentation or something like that, we're going to do a Q&A. I'll start asking the questions, and then later on, when we'll get further questions from the group. Donald, you state that in your book, in order to understand it, we need to know how you got here from there. And with that in mind, can you tell us more about your upbringing and what were the most important lessons you learned growing up?
Well, let me first thank you all for this opportunity. And my eye contact is going to be both the audience and on the on the Zoom. So I don't want to disturb anybody by consistently moving back and forth. It's also wonderful to reconnect with some old friends who I haven't seen in some time, even if it's virtual through Zoom. I would share with you that if I had to turn the clock back 45 years or so, and I would never have imagined that I would be in front of you all. I mean, where I was at that point in time I could never have imagined what it would have taken to get here. I grew up with my dad, who was one of the great teachers for me, not by lecture, but just by the experiences that I had to see him being such an intentional listener. But I would share with you, I could never have imagined, notwithstanding the fact that I'd heard stories all growing up, that I could ever be in the real estate business. My father would come home at the end of the day with his briefcase that was full of files. After dinner, he'd go into the den, open up these files, and there'd be all kinds of numbers that he'd be looking at. And I knew right then and there that this wasn't a business for me, because I was not a numbers cruncher. I thought I was a people person and never saw real estate in that fashion. So I majored in early childhood education, got a degree in that. I think some of the experiences that I had teaching really became an integral part of who I've become over time. When I was teaching the kids, I'd meet them in the mornings as they came in, greeting them. When we give out assignments, I would never just do it as a lecture. I literally would move around the classroom, get down on my hands and knees so I could be at the level of the students and be able to help them through their issues as they went through the program. In the summer before graduation, I was looking for an internship, some sort of opportunity for the summer. My father said, "Well, why don't you come and be a gopher for the summer?" And I said, "Sure, that's fine." So I literally was moved from brokerage to development to property management to administration. And what I found was the business had nothing to do with numbers. It was all about listening, being intentional, and exceeding expectations. And I figured, well, those are all the skill sets that I thought I had. And so instead of entering into the classroom full time as a teacher, I started after graduation in the business. And we had the opportunity to create the first satellite company in Columbia. We grew it to 20 folks out there, which was just an amazing experience to have, just sort of following all of what Jim Rouse had tried to create in Columbia, because we got there early enough. And so for the 20 or 25 years of being in Columbia, the company decided to sell half of its operating company and 3/4 of the real estate that it developed to a real estate investment trust, which gave me an opportunity then to go back into what I was really passionate about, which was education. Along with some friends, we started a foundation that supported school teachers in the rural counties of Western Maryland, Garrett and Allegheny counties, with many grants to do things with their students that they couldn't afford to do on their own. There wasn't an Able Foundation or a Weinberg Foundation out there. And so they raised their money by doing pizza sales, and thought this was an opportunity to engage teachers and have them really determine what it was that they thought they could do for their students who would have an impact. Somewhere in that process, I got a telephone call from Bill Struver, who I'm assuming everybody knows. And Bill we're on vacation, and Bill calls, and he starts in this conversation, unlike Bill, in a very low, calm voice. Says, I've been a commissioner for the city school system. We're thinking about making some changes. We're looking for an interim chief operating officer who's got some business expense. And then Bill goes, I can just see him pacing in the office, and his hands are moving in all directions, and he becomes incredibly passionate about this opportunity And I'm thinking to myself, well, that's a nice thing to do, to call me, to ask me if I know anybody. And so Bill finally stops talking and he says, well, and I said, well, what? He said, well, are you interested in the job? I said, am I interested in what job? He said, being this interim chief operating officer. Now understand that Manekin was an $11 million company and the school system was $850 million. It just, the thought of it was earth shaking. So I said, Bill, I said as calmly as I could to Bill, thank you for this. Let me give it some thought. And I went home and chatted with Brigitte and the kids and said, if I do this, I want you to understand this is like 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. There is no rest period in this. And they were enthusiastically embracing it. And for those 2 years, it was just an amazing experience to be behind the scenes in North Avenue. Instead of reading about North Avenue in the newspaper, I had the opportunity to be a part of North Avenue on the inside, really working with department heads who really had ideas about how they could bring additional services to the schools, to the teachers, to the students, to the families. And we made lots of connections for them to be able to implement those ideas that they had. And then our son came back from South Africa after just an incredible experience with an organization called Peace Players, and came and said, look, called and said, I'd like to have lunch with you. Immediately, I know there's something on his mind. This is not a social call. And so we go have lunch and I'm patiently waiting. And he said, Dad, I've been watching real estate from the eyes of my father and grandfather. I've been thinking a lot about that. Would you help me start a company, a real estate company? But I don't want to be seen as a real estate developer. I don't want to deal with I don't want to be seen as with landlords and tenants. And I want to be seen as I want the real estate to be that. I want real estate to be something that engages and empowers communities, that unites the city and launches great ideas. And with that, I said, I'd be thrilled to have this opportunity to help you start this company. And from there, that in 2007 until we're now 2021, almost 15 years later, I feel like I'm in the skybox watching Thibaut run this just amazing company that's done just really beautiful work in Baltimore along those same pieces about listening to the community, listening to the folks that we want to work with, and then implementing their ideas and using real estate as a vehicle to engage the community, engage the individuals who are thinking about these kinds of projects, to be a way to unite the city and to be able to launch great ideas. So in summary, that's a little bit of the journey to get from there to here.
Good. Donald, what was the thought process that you went through for the title of your book, The Inside Out Company, Putting Purpose and the People First?
I think that for some reason, I thought I had this idea for the title somewhere buried inside of me. And as I said, I had deep memories of my dad, who was such an intentional listener to individuals. Had the opportunity to be a teacher and to be able to be at the level of the students and trying to be not telling them what to do, but listening to their needs and being able to address those, not at a sort of a standing on the podium, but being down at their level. Then obviously the opportunity to be with the school system. And then, you know, as I was writing all of these pieces in the book, and these are all featured stories. And again, wanted to be really clear, this was not a textbook by any imagination. It was really meant to be a book for our children, their children, to be able to have them understand my journey. I wanted to be able to do that with my dad, and waited too long and was only able to record some things that are already in the book. And then when we got to the starting of Seawall and the notion of listening and then implementing, it dawned on me that this whole approach of being on the outside and going inside to find out what it is that individuals and communities were thinking about, and then again putting purpose and people first it became obvious that that was the title for the book.
Much has been written about purposeful companies. How did Seawall define this outlook?
Let me do it in form of an example. The first project we took on was the Center for Educational Excellence in Remington, literally at the corner of Howard and 26th Street. And it came about from my engagement with Teach for America over the years, and the fact that the school system hires 700 new school teachers a year. Teach for America was bringing 120 of those individuals in, and those individuals had never been to Baltimore. How do you take the mystery out of where to live, put them in a great supportive environment, get them focused on why they came to Baltimore, and hopefully they'd fall in love with Baltimore and want to become taxpayers. There were 30 or so nonprofit organizations that were underpinning the success of the school system in 30 different locations, paying rent to 30 different landlords, getting no economy of scale or no efficiency, and in large part, not being able to collaborate. And then there was the community itself that had been looking at this war-torn building that was vacant for 15 years. And so because of the knowledge that we had gained from hearing from Teach for America and the school system and these nonprofits, it seemed that this was an opportunity to create what became one of 3 of these centers for educational excellence. But I think in large part, I would share with you that the authors of the building and the concept were 6 teachers that had been in Baltimore for a year that were part of the design team, because we weren't building for ourselves, but building for the teachers. You know, they say almost every night we had to go to Kinko's to make copies of our lesson plans because the school system didn't have adequate equipment. So we put a mini Kinko's in the building, and they came down in the rows at the end of the day and made copies of their lesson plans. They were looking for a fitness center, so they didn't spend $80 a month there, and a place to gather. The nonprofits were looking for cost-effective, efficient space. And so to that, and be able to collaborate by walking down the hallway and seeing like-minded individuals. We then created 6 conference rooms in the building that the nonprofits could actually sign up for, so they didn't have to have that in their space and pay rent on it. So this was a free opportunity for them to take advantage of this. And then the community itself, I think we probably owned the building what seemed like moments, and we were in front of 3 community associations. And we said, our vision is to create great housing for teachers and office space for nonprofit organizations, but this is your building, it's in your community, and you need to be a part of this process. And so basically we took our pads of paper out and pencils and listened to them. And one of the pieces that they said was it'd be great to have a coffee shop in the corner of the building. And so where we thought we were going to have a 1-bedroom apartment, we ended up putting this coffee shop in there. And the coffee shop they were very clear they didn't want a Starbucks. They really wanted something that felt like Remington, felt like the community. It could be a gathering spot. So we found this young crowd who put together the coffee shop. Teachers got their Java hit when they left early in the morning. The community thought it was their office. And so again, this whole piece of just being able to be purposeful about what we were doing was, I think, the signature piece of it, was to have those audiences, the nonprofits, the teachers in the community, feel like they were the authors of the building.
Looking through the book, it's evident that relationships, both internal and external, are part of your everyday mantra. Can you share with us how this unfolded?
We were really clear when we started the company, and I would say it was really clear when in my sort of prior years that it is about relationships and it's about listening. And so this is a mindset for us to be active listeners. As I said, when we started the Center for Educational Excellence, we moved our office from downtown Baltimore to Remington, so we would be seen not as guests, but as neighbors. And we spent hours and hours and hours sitting on the stoops with the neighbors to really understand the history of Remington and their engagement in the community. And it was just incredibly eye-opening. But they really felt like we were something more than just the developer coming in with an idea. And so being with them on the stoops, listening to the stories was incredibly helpful. And one real benefit of this piece came from we were in the middle of construction. The windows were boarded up, but all this copper material was coming into the building for plumbing and heating and air conditioning, et cetera. And in those days, that was a pretty important commodity to have. And people literally were breaking into buildings to steal, the copper and resell it, notwithstanding that we had, monitoring systems. And so one evening, there were one gentleman or one person decided to start taking off the plywood on the first floor of on the front part of the building on Howard Street. And Larry, our neighbor, was sitting on the stoop and saw this, ran after this person, got him down on the ground, called the police, and they came and took him away. And so I think this whole piece of being relationship driven really pulled itself like that. So again, it was relationships with the community, with those folks that we're building for. And it's also for the people on the outside, those stakeholders that have been enormously successful, help us be enormously successful. And I would share a really wonderful story that's in the book. There's a woman, Karen, who worked for the city's Department of Plans and Permits. And she was just exceptional. I mean, every time we came down there with a question or had to get something signed off on, she literally walked us through the process and made everything happen. And so when we did the ribbon cutting for the building, Thibault was the master of ceremony, and the governor was there, and the mayor was there, and city council folks, and the neighborhood, and the teachers. And after acknowledging those in the audience, Thibault then went on to say, "I want to talk to you about Karen, who worked in the city's Department of Plans and Permits and was just exceptional for us." And so I'm sort of on the sideline listening to this, and I see the mayor taking notes, and I'm thinking that basically she's getting ready to make her presentation. And so the event's over. I go down the next couple of days, and Karen sees me walking in the hallway, runs out of her office, grabs my arm, pulls me into a corner, and she said, "First of all, I want to thank you for those kind words, and then to tell you that the mayor called me after the presentation and invited me and my husband to a Raven football game." I mean, it's just those kinds of pieces that go beyond. So it's about relationships, both internal and external. And it continues to still bring a great smile on my face to know that acknowledging those individuals that you don't see and are not visible and are doing this incredible work, it just was really an important piece to do.
Yeah, I think that not only does the inside out that you're talking about apply to your clients and to the community and to the city or governmental, but you talked about inside out with regard to your own company, as well as to your team, the people that you hire from the outside. You want to comment on that?
I would share with you that in terms of the folks that we have hired, of the 25 folks at Seawall, I think that there are 3 folks that have had real estate backgrounds. And not that that's a fault, but we really ended up hiring folks who came in, who bought into our purpose, had been purposeful in terms of the work that they had been doing. And again, for me, it was the ability, you can teach the rote skills of real estate. What you can't teach is the relationship side of it. And either you come with that intention of distinguishing between relationships and transactions. And so the young folks that have come on board with us all believe in the work that we're doing, but they bring their own mindset of understanding that what we're doing is purposeful, and they want to be engaged with it. When I was in Columbia running that office, we were wanted to hire a marketing person. And so this David showed up for the interview, literally in a navy blazer, nice coat and tie, gray slacks, the whole deal, and warm handshakes. And he comes and starts talking about his resume. And I stopped him right away and I said, "Look, your resume is terrific. I really want to be able to get to know you differently." And I said, "Why don't we take a walk?" So he took his coat off and left it in the office, and we started walking. And what struck me, and has struck me relative to the folks we've hired at Seawall, is that in that entire conversation, he was never in the first person singular. He was always in the first person plural. It was always about we. And when he spoke with real energy and excitement, and in his voice and his hands. And, so we, had this long walk, and we sat on the curb at the end, and my partner drives by, and he's got 6 cold beers in the car and gives us 2 of them, and 2 of us are sitting on the curb having a beer and just continuing to talk. And then David came to work with us. So, part of all of this is trying to look beyond the roteness of the resume and recommendations, and just to hear people's voices. We were talking a little bit about this getting ready before lunch, and how much you can learn by people's face-to-face interaction that you can't get from Zoom or telephone calls or emails. And so we just get so much enjoyment out of the opportunity to meet the folks that have made such a great impact on Seawall, and seeing how they're carrying that out.
Throughout the book, you write about awakening possibilities. I was taken by your quote from Max Dupree. We can teach ourselves to see things the way they are. Only with vision can we begin to see things the way they can be. Can you share some of your thinking about that?
I think in large part, this centers on being able to empower those folks that work with us to be able to do the things that they intentionally believe is there for them to do. It's a mindset about exceeding expectations every moment of possibility, and exceeding expectations has no barriers. It's whatever the imagination can think of at the moment that would leave a lasting impression. And I mean, there's so many examples of that, about how we try to conduct ourselves. On one of those snowstorms that we had a few years ago, schools were closed for a week. And so we figured out how to get kegs of beer delivered to the courtyards in the building, so the tenants could have beer and enjoy themselves outside. Totally unexpected, to have kegs delivered. We host brown bag lunches for the nonprofit organizations in the building, and invite smart people to come in and help them think differently about their ideas. We have a dinner each year with the CEO of the school system and the teachers in the building. So she has the opportunity to listen to her constituents, and the teachers have this wonderful opportunity to rub elbows and break bread with the CEO of the school system. So it's thinking along those lines on a regular basis that just has us thinking. And for me, a wonderful story that's also portrayed in the book. When I was at the school system, there was this incredibly wonderful woman who was a teacher, a principal, came to North Avenue to administrative position, and she was in charge of logistics. And in that role, she had to figure out how to deliver mail from North Avenue to 186 schools. Now, with all due respect for her, she had not the foggiest idea how to organize that piece of it. But she really wanted to have the tools to do it. And so we collectively got together and thought about it. And then I happened to sit on the board at the United Way, and one of the other board members was district manager for UPS, who every day gets up figuring out how to get my package to Matt overnight. And so I shared with him the issue that we were having. He said, "This is not a problem." They flew in 3 people from California for a month, and taught her and gave her team about how to be able to deliver mail that came in at 7. The folks came to work at 7 in the morning. Mail didn't come until 10. How to get all that delivered in a positive and time efficient way. So these are just some of the things that we think about in terms of creating awareness and possibilities and again, not using ourselves, but recognizing that in the community, there are so many individuals that want nothing more than this, than to be helpful and help organizations be successful.
You end the book with a section called Leaving a Legacy, and it touches on the concept of the ripple effect. What actions do we take daily that will spread beyond us while we are present or long gone? Can you talk about that?
Yeah, this is I mean, this is really near and dear to my heart. You know, the ripple effect piece and a couple of stories that are also embedded in the book. I was with our grandson walking to Remington, maybe to our house from where we parked the car, and there was a can of soda on the sidewalk, and I picked it up and put it in the trash can. And his immediate reaction was, "That's exactly what my dad does." And so there's this sort of the generational piece of it. We were finishing up the Remington Road development that has Hopkins, the apartments, and the retail on that first level next to our house. And it was on a Saturday morning, and our grandchildren and I went to breakfast around the corner, and then came back, and there was a whole crew of working folks on Saturday. And I shared with my grandkids that this was really an important piece for them to consider, that these folks are working a 6th day on our benefit to be able to get the project finished on time. And they then said to me, "Well, what can we do to celebrate it?" And I said, "Well, let's give them an applause." And so we got closer to the building. And so it's those kinds of pieces that leave an indelibly etched in the minds of the kids. But I think in sort of ending it for me, I got from a friend of mine sent me this story, and it's really for everybody in the audience. It's that I'm trying to look back and forth at. That imagine that you're 80 years old. Some of us are closer to 80 than others, but imagine that you're 80 years old and your spouse or partner has decided to have a celebration to honor this amazing time in your life. And so there are people who you've known as family, the community, people that you've worked with over the years, all have gathered, and you're sitting in this beautiful Adirondack chair, and each one of them gets to stand up and say something about you. What it is that, can you imagine that those folks would be saying about you in terms of your engagement with the community, engagement at work, engagement with your family? And so there's a place to write in each one of those categories what it would be, what you would say about yourself right now, well before 80, but you would want people to say about yourself. And I think this was such an important closure for me as I think about the book, is that what is it that we're leaving behind for the next generation? And so as I shared, the audiences for me are our children and our grandchildren, but most equally as important is this next generation of leaders who aspire to greatness for themselves, for the communities that they're serving, and that the ability to sort of stop and say, how do I imagine my life to have been? There's lots of examples that I've had the opportunity to be a part of over time that are, think about the Walter Sunheims of the world, who have left such a legacy for all of us. So that's the sort of the theme for me as I ended the book, about what is it, how do we leave a legacy for ourselves, for the communities that follow.
Yeah, David Brooks often talks about how much more important it is to focus on your eulogy rather than your resume. And I think that's what you've been saying.
Right. What I didn't want to do about the eulogy is you wouldn't be able to hear what people are saying about you. So I figured I'd get you to be 80 years old, and that you still had the opportunity to hear what people were actually saying about you as you lived your life. With all due respect, eulogies are wasted on dead people. I think it'd be much more advantageous to have your eulogy while you're still reasonably erect.
Okay. Looking
So
for,
anybody
other
have any
questions?
thoughts or questions or want to pick my brain a little bit further? I'd love to hear from you all, those that are on Zoom and those that are front and center.
I would love to hear you talk about after you did our house, then you looked around the neighborhood and tried to improve the whole neighborhood by taking separate row houses. Could you talk about that?
That's a great story. So,
can you repeat the question?
okay, yes, I'm sorry. So the question was about our house, and then to be able to tell the story about the houses that got improved, that were improved across the street that were a part of the Seawall Development. As I share with you, one of the visions for the Center for Educational Excellence was to create this great housing, take the mystery out of where to live, get people focused on why they came to Baltimore, and hopefully that they find and get to know Baltimore over time and want to make Baltimore their home. So a couple years into the project, we had 6 teachers that came to us and said, look, we love what we're doing in the classroom. We've fallen in love with Remington and Baltimore. Are you doing anything about for sale housing? We hadn't given it any thought at all because we just thought people would go out and buy houses in the city. And as we looked around, there were 30 some houses, some of which were sort of slumlord variety homes, and the other were 10 houses across from our house that the city owned. It was a part of a HUD project that went south. And so on this Remington Avenue street, there were, some really beautiful homes that were occupied, and then there were these 10 boarded out homes. And so we put an RFP into the city, and for $1, we bought 10 houses in addition to the 20 in the community. But when we got into those 10 houses, we discovered that we had overpaid by only paying $1. It's hard to imagine. I should have brought some slides to show. But with those 6 teachers as part of the architectural team, we were able to design. We got great support from foundations in Baltimore, from the banks, and literally had an open house, and all 30 houses were sold on a weekend, which then changed the whole vibe of the neighborhood. If we learned something from that, we got introduced a little bit of gentrification, because those houses now are being sold at significantly more. The landlords that are in the neighborhood now have increased their rents to those people that have been living in Remington for a number of years to much higher than they can afford. So I think in retrospect, we would have done something different in terms of what you could actually sell those houses for if you were interested in selling. But that, really changed the whole vibe as you drive up to have our house on the left and these beautiful new homes on the right side. Any other thoughts or questions?
You speak up in the chat and we'll call on you. Or in the meantime, I know you talk about what you've done with contractors and other members of your team. You want to talk about that for the group?
Yeah, let me pick up a little bit on the prior conversation. I mean, there are ways that you can create in the community sort of associations of homeowners that put a ceiling on what you can sell the house for. So if you bought it for 150, you could only sell it for 10% more than that piece. Okay. Again, as I think about this piece, contractors have just an enormous importance for us. And I sort of double back to my Columbia experiences. We had, when we built these single story flex R&D buildings, and each company came in and leased a certain amount of space. And in the beginning we had, you get the requirements, give it to an architect would do a drawing, go out to the general contractor put it out to subcontractors. And by the time you got it back with a number to construct a real estate deal, it was already 2 weeks or 3 weeks. And so what we decided to do was partner with all the subcontractors that actually did the work, the plumber, the drywall, the mechanical, floor covering, et cetera. And we chose we chose one contractor from each vendor, created a relationship with them, and they literally gave us their pricing list. And so when a prospect came, we got a drawing, we could price it overnight because we had all the numbers, and we could deliver a proposal the next day, which really differentiated ourselves in the marketplace. And again, we probably paid more for that process than we would if we'd have put it out to bid. But our thinking was, how do we do this and be able to be more focused on the organizations that we were trying to lease space to.
Joe Consola, you have a question?
Oh, okay, you unmuted me. Thank you. Since Don is very interested in eye contact, and we can't do that right now, I put my video on too. So
Thank you.
having said that, first a comment and then a question. The first comment is, when I saw our house, I just want to say it's, I had a discussion with another person on this call earlier, and it's your intuition, I think, that is on point, hits the nail on the head. And our house was a perfect example of that. How many years ago was that? 3 or 4? Or how?
4 years ago.
Somebody remind me?
4 years ago.
4. Okay.
3 or 4 years ago.
Okay. So I just want to, what I want to say is that that was a pre-pandemic design. And when
Correct.
I go around nowadays, post-pandemic, it's actually an example of what to do for the future. So this is what's weird. There are developers, and then there are other developers, right? And
We're losing you a little bit.
upon as being crazy, or they're looked at upon as being visionary. Oh, they're looked upon as being crazy, visionary, or whatever. But when you get to a point, when does your intuition say, no matter what anyone else says, to move forward on something the way you want to do it versus what other people have done traditionally and conventionally? Because you see things that other people don't see, you feel things. I'm calling you a developer philosopher, okay, in your approach. So my question is, when do you decide to push that button and take action when no one else will do it before you?
Let me answer it a couple of ways. One, the idea of our house wasn't ours. We literally we were brought in by, sort of a dozen aspiring chefs who had great ideas about food, but didn't have the capital to be able to invest in a full restaurant. And so, so they became the architects for this piece. And so we then traveled around the country visiting other food courts. And the most important question we asked those individuals that we met with from around the country was, now that you've been opened up for 3 or 4 years, what is it that you would do differently? And so that became an opportunity to grow from there. But I guess in particular, the Our House piece, again, like the other projects, was designed by the actual folks that would be there, space. When we did the Center for Educational Excellence in Remington around the corner, when you looked at the building, it was completely boarded up. You walked through the building and it was full of pigeons. The graffiti, mostly PG rated, was all over the walls. And everybody that sort of advised us said, this is not the building to do. This is not, it's not in the right location. And yet we felt like we had the structure itself was very sound. It was in the shadow of Hopkins. It was right off I-83. And so we used our own intuition and said, makes sense. And then having it being backed up by teachers and nonprofits and the community allowed us to exactly do the development that we thought was important to do there. So notwithstanding all the folks that worked against us, we moved it forward, I would share with you that Enterprise Community Partners has been our partner in every one of our developments that we've done to date. And I called Bart Harvey up early on and said, we'd like you to come visit this project. We have an idea. And Bart brought Joe Wazalewski, who headed up their New Markets division. Thibault and I had rehearsed this presentation as Bart was walking through the building. And after 3 or 4 minutes, Bart says, I've heard enough. Literally, our hearts sank. And Bart said, whatever it takes to do this project, we're all in 100%. And so again, part of it was to be able to see what's not in front of you, to be able to see what's beyond that point was, I think, what Jim Rouse had created years ago with the developments that he had done.
We got 3 more questions on the chat.
Hey,
Let's-
Nate,
let's-
just a quick follow-up to that, if I may. And all I would say is that you talked about the people who created that space and their vision and the chefs and the restaurants. But one of the ideas I want to emphasize is that your design, your open pavilion, kind of open wall design was very futuristic in terms of what is happening today.
Right.
So you matched that need, expression of a vision with the functionality that was futuristic, is my point.
Yeah, great. Thank you. You're right.
Okay, let's try and cover these 3 more questions. Time is running short, but nonetheless, Seema has a question on developers' fees. Comment? Do you want to state that? Seema, are you there?
Oh, you wanted me to read it. Oh, okay. So obviously, Donald, I work with a lot of aspiring developers who have maybe the sentiment that you're talking about in the book, but they are brand new to this work. So the comment that I put in the chat was basically, developers' fees, quote unquote, don't generally take into account the time that it takes those kinds of relationships to build those relationships. So where do you charge time as a developer to sitting on the stoop if you're brand new to this? But the interesting thing about relationship building is that it's actually more valuable over time. And it's cumulative, like you said, once you start a relationship, that actually takes the longest amount of time, but keeping it, if you do it well, takes less and less in time over the long run, which we all know in other aspects of real estate. But so how would a new developer start this and still have money to keep the lights on at the beginning of their journey?
Seema, I think for me, that's a starting point for whatever new developers are thinking about for their own work. I think if you go into it looking at the bottom line first, I think you miss the opportunity that's in front of you. I think that we have created at Seawall a piece that sort of advisors to Black developers and have had a number of opportunities to serve those individuals who have great ideas, to help them think through all the issues that are associated with upfront time, the financial models, introducing them to lenders, introducing them to investors, helping them understand about the contractors. So in fact, they have all the munition associated with the development that allows them to move it forward, and at the same time being able to develop those relationships in communities that they are interested in serving.
Joe
I hope that addresses your thinking. If not, we can talk more about it next week when we get together with your students.
Thank you.
Joe Nathanson, you want to ask your question?
Hey, hi, Don. Great to connect with you once again, even if it's virtually. I'm looking forward to the opening of the new Lexington market. 40 years ago, Baltimore community was welcoming a Harbor Place as a wonderful place to gather, to have a variety of food. And now we see that that has 70% vacancy rate. Any thoughts about that neighbor of yours a few blocks to the east?
This is, do you want, this is a conversation about Lexington Market?
About a future for Harbor Place.
Well, if you go back and recently, Jimmy Rouse, who's Jim's son, wrote an op-ed piece in the Baltimore Business Journal about Harbor Place, and that it has literally moved away from what Jim's vision was as a gathering place, and to have small businesses being able to provide great food. That you had Phillips, that was a major tenant in there, and people came to eat at Phillips, and then Phillips obviously moved out to another facility. But like you, I remember clearly being downtown and just the number of people congregating in and around the building. I mean, they came because there was a sense of something local, that the food was local to the community, that the number of startups in the food building, and then even in the building next to it, there was more sort of retail. I think the folks that ended up buying Harbor Place put profit first, as against trying to figure out what the community needs, which is a whole listening engagement to figure out what it needs, what it would take to have people gather again at the harbor, which they haven't done now for a long period of time because of Harbor Place having a much different look now than it had. But if you're really interested, I thought Jimmy Rouse's editorial was really quite right on, and I can send it to Nate if you want to distribute it to your folks, because it talks a lot about what Harbor Place could be if in fact we went back to the concept of listening to what you hope to be the audiences that would come to the Harbor Place.
Thank you. And yes, please share that with Nate for
Yep.
all the rest
I
of
will I will send that to Nate and have him distribute that op-ed piece.
Okay, good. Matt, you want to finish things off with your question?
I'll bellow and then Donald can repeat if you like. Speaking of visioning, what's next for Seawall? You've got a wonderful, terrific company thing going on here. What's next? What's in the future?
I mean, we are looking for these kinds of opportunities that enhance communities. We are, as you well know, very focused on Lexington Market. I could have invited the gentleman who's really engaged with that piece. And like the other projects that we've done, Lexington Market has been based on the community. We've spent hours and hours and hours in every community possible to get their input, to both understand how they see the market, how will it be about generating people to come back into the market. We've really reached out into the Black and women community because there are a lot of entrepreneurial folks that have great ideas for food, but don't have the resources. And so we created a fund, $1 million fund, to help those organizations have the capital to improve, to make a station for themselves within the market, and also to be able to get the technical skills about how to run it as a business. So we've been and I think that when the new market opens, there'll be at least 60 to 70% of the occupants will be people of color and women, which I think is a real opportunity. But again, we're looking for it to be in neighborhoods that have not been fully invested in, to try to figure out what the ideas are. We're continue to look into the Remington community. We're looking into areas in West Baltimore. But again, part of it is as our son wanted to creating this building, this company was, about empowering communities, launching great ideas, and uniting the city. And so those things that we're looking for have to fall into that sort of category.
Okay, great. Well, want to thank you for a wonderful presentation. Steve Gregg, who had spoken before, is saying that he has a project for you in El Paso, so you can expand out there. And you have a standing invitation for a tour of the borderlands and great work being done out there. Anyway,
I look
we
forward to
thank you.
getting Steve's note and continuing this friendship that we developed from the time out in Phoenix. And I can't thank you all enough for this opportunity to present, to share ideas, and get feedback from you all.
And everyone, please take a look at Don's book. It's available on Amazon, at great what is that? The local
Greedy
store.
Reads.
Yeah.
Greedy Reads.
And so again, thank you, and thank everyone here for coming, and we'll see you next month.
Thank you again.
Bye.